And now, before I bring Chris Blackwell himself on stage, the man who has said often that his record company, Island Records, didn't really have many hits, I would like you to, in fact, see one of them that made him world famous. Ladies and gentlemen, the pirate, Chris Blackwell. Chris, tell us a little bit about that hit we just saw, because that was one of your very, very first.
That was my first.
It was your first.
It was my first outside of Jamaica, because I had some hits in Jamaica before I left, but that was my first.
Tell us something about Millie and how you discovered her. If I'm right, she was 14 or 15 years old?
15, yeah. When I went to England, when I was going to England, I went to the sound system guys in Jamaica, the other people who made records. And I told them that I was going to start in England and asked them if they'd let me have their records, release their records in England. And one of the people was Coxsone Dodd, who was really the father of Jamaican music, the person who really deserves all the credit for creating the music. And the fifth record I put out was a record called We'll Meet, which was a duet with a guy called Roy and Millie. And at that time I had a kind of double life, because in my daytime I was driving all around the periphery of London, selling records from my car. And in the night I had a kind of social life in the West End of London. And I'd play people these records. And they sounded like they came from the moon at the time, because it was never, you never heard anything quite like those early Jamaican records. And whenever I played We'll Meet, people would always say, please let me take this record back with me. So I thought, wow, people really seem to like this record. So I decided that I'd contact Millie's mother, which I did, and asked her if she would let her come over to England, which she did. And so Millie arrived on literally my doorstep, because at that time when I booked her into the hotel, when I took her into the hotel, they said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, we made a mistake, we were completely booked out, which was, that was 1964, so it was very different times in those days. And so Millie had to end up staying with me, which kind of screwed up my personal life somewhat. But
so many questions come to my mind.
Anyhow, I had my assistant at the time to go and try and find, as quickly as possible, somewhere for Millie to live. But as soon as Millie turned up, suddenly the apartment had, somebody had actually booked it already, and they were terribly sorry.
Why did this happen like that?
Because of Millie's complexion. That was why it happened like that at that time. So anyhow, one day I had an early appointment, and I got out of bed and switched on the hot water of the bath, got back into bed, and I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up and there was splashing in my bath, and Millie had got in my bath. And I was furious. I was just furious. So I told her, you got to leave. You can't stay here. She said, where will I go? I said, I don't care. You got to leave. So she packed a little grip, or a little small suitcase. They call it grip in Jamaica, and left. And then I went off to my appointment. And then on the way to the appointment, I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen to her? Where's she going to go? Where's she going? How's she going to go? So as soon as I finished the appointment, I came right back to the house and waited, because she didn't have a key. And then about 5 o'clock, she strutted back in, and I said, well, okay. She said, yeah. I've got myself an apartment. I said, how could you have got an apartment? She'd got herself an apartment. So that's when I knew she was going to make it.
That was the beginning of the hit. But you should say something about what you were doing on the outskirts of London. Because I think those trips you took on the outskirts of London were the first general distribution you had of the soundtracks you found.
Excuse me. Well, as I say, I didn't produce any records in those first days.
Right.
I just released the records that were given to me from the other producers in Jamaica: Coxon, King Edwards, Duke Reid, Leslie Kong, all the people who really started the music business in Jamaica. Then I would release those, but Jamaicans lived in the periphery areas: Brixton, Lewisham, Willesden, Harlesden, Hackney, all those periphery areas around London.
And you would go around in a car delivering?
Yeah, I had a little Mini, I had a very small catalogue. So I had my entire catalogue in the car, and I'd drive around, and the Mini was very agile to get through traffic and everything, and I was able to visit a lot of shops. And I loved this. I really enjoyed this whole process. It was really great. And also because I carried my own catalogue, my entire catalogue, I was able to replace records if they were out of stock. One of the records I picked up at that time was the original version of My Boy Lollipop, because I heard it, I liked it, I thought it would be a hit. In fact, it was never a hit. It wasn't a hit in America. And it wasn't even a hit when it went down to the sound systems, but I liked it. And then what I would do is I'd make a tape of all the records, which in those days was quite a big production. It would be a reel-to-reel tape, mainly because I liked the records, but I would buy them for 43 cents and I'd sell them for like £100 to the sound system people. So it was too expensive to keep the record. So I had them on tape, and then...
That's a good investment.
I had to pay for my fare, because I came up to master the records at that time. So I brought Millie over just really because she had this unique sounding voice. So one day, I'd also brought over somebody called Ernest Ranglin, who was the person who sort of pulled me into the music business. And he was probably the most prominent Jamaican jazz musician at that time and guitarist. And actually, I brought him over to England to try and break him, through the jazz clubs in England. Anyhow, he was with me. He and I and Millie were sitting in a room, and I found this tape, and I said, well, let's put on this tape. We heard a couple of tracks, and suddenly the original version of My Boy Lollipop came up, and I said, that's the one, let's do that. And so that's how that happened.